Originally written in the late 1920s and early 1930s, Barracoon, The Story of the Last Black Cargo, 2018, is the transcribed posthumous autobiography of Oluwale Cudjo Lewis Kasola, 1841–1935, authored by Zora Neale Hurston, 1891–1960. Hurston, a notable figure in the Harlem Renaissance, was a writer, anthropologist, folklorist, and filmmaker with a deep appreciation for Black life and culture in the U.S. South. Her renowned works include Their Eyes Were Watching God, 1937, Dust Tracks on a Road, 1942, and Mules and Men, 1936. Edited by independent scholar Deborah G. Plant, Barracoon became a New York Times bestseller, was named Time Magazine's Best Nonfiction Book of 2018, and earned the title of Best Book of 2018 by National Public Radio's Book Concierge. Barracoon presents the first-hand account of Kasola, an African man captured aboard the Clotilda, the last slave ship to traverse the Middle Passage in 1859. Hurston, blending her anthropological expertise with her literary talent, spent several weeks interviewing Kasola, meticulously transcribing his words to authentically capture his oral and physical storytelling style. While the narrative sometimes meanders, it generally adheres to the linear trajectory of Kasola's life, intertwined with Hurston's framing narrative of her encounters with him. The book chronicles Kasola's extraordinary journey, from a joyful youth in Africa to the harrowing ordeal of the Middle Passage and slavery in the U.S., and eventually to his efforts to rebuild his life in Africatown, Alabama, where he raised a family and outlived them all. It is a poignant and sometimes humorous historical record, touching on themes of home and exile, pain and joy, family, and the unpredictability of life and death. In the introduction, Hurston recounts her initial meeting with Kasola while conducting research for her advisor at Barnard College, Dr. Franz Boas. She later interviewed Kasola for her own work, constructing his autobiography. Hurston provides historical context on the slave trade, detailing the Clotilda's illegal voyage to Africa, the events there, and its return to the U.S. with African captives. Chapter 1 begins with Hurston's framing narrative, describing one of her visits to Kasola's house. Kasola shares stories about his father and grandfather, a chief in his African hometown with many wives and children. In Chapter 2, Hurston brings peaches as a gift for Kasola, who continues to recount his grandfather's life, including the tale of a man who illegally kept a poisonous leopard whisker and suffered fatal consequences for it. In Chapter 3, Kasola recounts his grandfather's illness and death, describing the collective mourning of his wives and the local community, and detailing the customs surrounding such a significant death. In Chapter 4, Hurston brings Kasola 2 Virginia hams and a watermelon. He takes her to the nearby church, where he serves as sexton and shares stories about his father, who was a chief to the king. Kasola describes the coming-of-age rituals for boys in his village of Bante and Takoi, and the training they underwent to become soldiers. In Chapter 5, Kasola narrates the brutal attack by Dahomey soldiers on Takoi, where many were either beheaded or captured to be sold into slavery. In Chapter 6, Hurston returns to help Kasola clean the church as he continues recounting his capture. He describes being taken to the west coast of Africa, where he and other captives were held in a barracoon for several weeks before being sold, boarded onto a slave ship, and transported to the United States. Chapter 7 covers Kasola's life in slavery, where he hauled wood and freight on and off boats, enduring grueling work. During the Civil War, Union soldiers informed him that he was free. In Chapter 8, Kasola describes how he and other freed people rebuilt their lives by founding Africatown, selecting leaders, and building a church. In Chapter 9, Kasola explains how he met his wife, Abila Seeley, a fellow African woman in the U.S. They had 5 sons and 1 daughter. He shares the tragedy of the deputy sheriff shooting one of his sons and the illness that claimed his daughter. Chapter 10 recounts a time when Kasola was hit by a train in Mobile, Alabama, resulting in a serious injury that left him using a cane. Although he won a lawsuit against the railroad, his lawyer absconded with the settlement money. In Chapter 11, Kasola tells Hurston about another son, David, who was killed by a train in Plateau. His son Po Lee, outraged by the injustice, disappeared one day and never returned. Just months later, his son Jimmy fell ill and died. Hurston takes Casola's photograph on the day he shares this. In chapter 12, Casola recounts how his wife, Abila, succumbed to grief over their children's deaths and died, followed shortly by their last living son, Alec. Casola reflects on Abila's belonging to God and accepts her death as God's right. Hurston closes the narrative with reflections on the 2 months she spent befriending and interviewing Casola. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe. Thank you.